This is the beginnings of an international relations course, looking at the various approaches to international relations. So let's look at how IR affects us in our daily life. First of all, what is international relations? Most people would tell you it's the interactions between the states, but there's more actors than just states. And we have to take into today's modern era states and non-states, such as Al Qaeda, ISIS. Even though ISIS is trying to become a state, they don't have a sovereign territory. Therefore, they want to seem like they're somewhat legitimate, but yet still not recognized as legitimate by the rest of the free world. The leaders of these states and non-state actors, the governmental bureaucracies within them, the for-profits and non-profit organizations such as Amnesty International as a non-profit or a multinational corporation such as Toyota. And then the individuals, and that's every one of us, and how we participate in this theater of international politics. Shakespeare said it best, all the world's a stage, we are merely players. Well, the world is one big stage, and we are the players. What we do affects everything. It's also the study of the behaviors of all of these actors as individuals and as a group. So it's almost like a big sociology lesson in the long run. And how we participate in the entire international political processes. How much will we allow? How will we help those less fortunate? But in this case, we don't have in a lot of traditional ideas of crossing borders. We are all trading with each other. We are all working with each other. Now, a lot of times we'll need to look at the theories of these, and theories give us a framework for which to really understand the everyday events in IR and answer a lot of basic foundational questions. And the biggest questions we find are, why do countries go to war? Why do they cooperate? Or why do they throw each other under the bus? And that's been going on for centuries. How do they interact with trade? Sometimes we trade, sometimes we just turn our backs on the other countries and other peoples. So most of these prominent theories include the idea of liberalism, which says human nature is basically good, very optimistic, and states will cooperate and follow the norms as set by the international community and the procedures that have been mutually agreed upon for the benefit of all society. There's realism, where states exist in an anarchic international system, anarchy being where there is no one supreme sovereign. States act in their own interest, they are selfish. This is based on Hobbes's ideas. Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century Englishman who wrote about the world needing a Leviathan that you give up freedoms for security. There's radicalism, that the actions of individuals are largely determined by economic class, that the state is an agent of international capitalism, and that the international system is dominated by the capitalist system. A couple of theorists that fall into this are Karl Marx and Immanuel Wallerstein in the world systems theory, where they look at exploitation of third world countries or developing countries just to get their natural resources, so the G8s in this case, and a lot of other cases, developed countries are just exploiting the workers as well as the corporations within those countries, exploiting workers. Then there's constructivism. The key structures in the state are not material, but are rather intersubjective and social. The interest of states is not fixed, but it's malleable and ever-changing. In other words, it is fluid. Anarchy, in this case, as Alexander Wentz said in 1992, is what a state makes of it. Think about how we look at certain animals, like a pit bull. A pit bull dog, people look at it and they think, oh my God, it's a mean dog. Others will look at it and say, oh, it's just a nice dog. It's what we make of it. But there are a lot of other different theoretical approaches. There are other critical theory approaches. There's the English school. And there's also feminism that's very, very new in the field of international studies. There are different approaches that help us see IR from different viewpoints. And that's the thing. We look at one event from a series of different lenses. And we'll get into that later on in other chapters. So let's look at developing answers. And a lot of methods scholars employ to understand IR. First of all, looking at history, because it gives us a base. It invites the students of IR to acquire detailed knowledge of specific events, but can also be used to test generalizations and test the relationships among various events. A good example of this is the use of history to understand the causes of war between Athens and Sparta by Thucydides in his history of the Peloponnesian War. However, certain lessons of history are rarely clear or without controversy if you look at Vietnam and the subsequent more recent war in Iraq that began in 2003. Then we look at philosophy from classical Greek philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle that focus on the state and its leaders, and then the more modern and what they call the classical era itself, philosophers like Hobbes, Rousseau, Immanuel Kant, basically focusing on the characteristics of man and how those characteristics might influence the character of international society. We could add John Locke into this. We could add Machiavelli. We can add economists into this later on. We can look at Friedrich von Hayek versus John Maynard Keynes. Just how man is and what the role of the state is in dealing with society. Also, the study of philosophy has contributed to the development of IR by calling attention to fundamental relationships, those between the individual and society, between individuals in society, and between different societies and cultures. And both of these, history and philosophy, allow us to delve into the fundamental questions, basically the nature of man and the broad characteristics of the state and of international society. They let us speculate on what are moral elements or normative elements in political life. And there are three main questions. First, what should be the role of the state? Secondly, what ought to be the norms in international society? And thirdly, how might international society be structured to achieve order? Now, amongst all these others, to add on to this, and this is a very complex subject to begin with, we add behavioralism into the mix, and behavioralism proposes individuals, both alone and in groups, act in patterned ways. And the task of the behavioral scientist is to suggest plausible hypotheses regarding those patterned actions and to test them. Scholars in this area hope to predict future behavior based on past behaviors. And a lot of times that's a good indication, but it's not always the only indication. An example of the behavioral method is the Correlates of War project from the University of Michigan. And what they did is they looked at wars that were happening by collecting data and looking for specific patterns. And during the 1980s and 1990s, scholars seriously questioned the behavioral approach. The foundational questions, the nature of man and society, are neglected by behaviorists because they are not easily tested by scientific empirical methods. And then we have to look at one last bit here. Alternative approaches such as postmodernism and constructivism, they challenge conventional understandings through deconstructing core concepts and examining how ideas shape norms and identities within the international fields. Examples of this include Cynthia Weber's examination of sovereignty's meaning changes over time and place because it has adjusted, and Christine Sylvester's analysis of the Greenham Common Peace Camp and the women who protested the British nuclear role. Thus, theories provide us with a framework to ask and answer core foundational questions.